Have you ever wondered what you'd do if disaster struck? When the sirens wail and the smoke billows, would you run towards the danger or away from it? Tonight, we're telling the story of an ordinary person who faced that exact choice, a man whose quiet life was turned upside down by a wall of fire. This is the story of Jack, a rancher who became an unlikely hero. Out here, where the sky is big and the towns are small, life usually follows the rhythm of the seasons. For Jack, his days were marked by mending fences, tending to his cattle, and watching the sun dip below the horizon from his porch. It was a peaceful existence, one he'd built with his own two hands. But on one dry, windy evening, that peace was shattered. It started with a smell, a faint, acrid scent of smoke carried on the wind. At first, Jack dismissed it. Wildfires were a part of life in this region, but they were usually distant threats, miles away in the uninhabited hills. He scanned the horizon. Nothing. But the wind was picking up, howling like a hungry wolf, and the smell was getting stronger. An uneasy feeling began to crawl up his spine. He went inside and turned on the local news. The reporter's face was grim. A fire, sparked by a downed power line, was raging out of control, fueled by a summer's worth of dry brush and driven by relentless winds. The map on the screen showed a rapidly expanding red zone, a monster of flames devouring everything in its path, and it was heading straight for his neighbor's property, the old Miller farm, where Sarah, a widow in her 70s, lived alone. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. Jack's first thought was for his own ranch, his home, his animals. Every instinct screamed at him to load up what he could and get out. The authorities were already issuing evacuation orders. But then, an image flashed in his mind. Sarah, alone in that old wooden farmhouse, likely unaware of the speed at which the danger was approaching. She was stubborn, he knew that. She probably thought she could wait it out. He couldn't leave her. It wasn't even a debate in his mind. It was a certainty. Grabbing his keys, a wet towel, and a heavy-duty flashlight, he jumped into his old, reliable pickup truck. The roar of the engine was a stark contrast to the growing roar of the wind and the distant crackle of the fire. The sky to the east was no longer blue-black. It was an angry, pulsating orange. Driving down the familiar dirt road felt like entering another world. Ash began to fall like morbid snow, coating his windshield. Embers, like fiery insects, danced across the road, some of them landing in the dry grass and instantly igniting new, smaller fires. The air was thick and hot, making it hard to breathe. It felt like driving into the belly of a dragon. He pulled up to Sarah's farmhouse, his headlights cutting through the swirling smoke. The house was dark. For a terrifying moment, he feared he was too late. He slammed the truck door and ran to the front porch, pounding on the heavy oak door. "Sarah, it's Jack! You have to get out now. The fire's almost here." There was no answer. He tried the knob. It was locked. Without a second thought, he reared back and slammed his shoulder against the door. Once, twice. On the third try, the old wood splintered and the door flew open. Inside, the smoke was even thicker. "Sarah!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. He found her in the living room, passed out in her armchair. A book had fallen from her lap. The smoke had overcome her. Adrenaline surged through him. He scooped her up. She was lighter than he expected and carried her out of the house, back to the relative safety of his truck. He placed her in the passenger seat and was about to jump in when he heard a panicked sound from the barn. Her horse, Starlight. He knew he shouldn't. The rational part of his brain was screaming at him to leave, to save himself and Sarah. But he couldn't leave an animal to that fate. He wrapped the wet towel around his face and sprinted towards the barn. The heat was intense now. The main fire was cresting the nearby ridge, and the sound was a deafening freight train of destruction. Inside the barn, Starlight was rearing and kicking at the stall door, her eyes wide with terror. The air was a choking haze. Jack worked quickly, his hands fumbling with the latch in the dim light. He finally got the stall open and grabbed the horse's lead rope. "Easy, girl. Easy, he soothed, his voice muffled by the towel. He led the terrified animal out of the barn just as embers began to land on its shingled roof. He tied Starlight S. rope to the back of his truck, there was no other way, and jumped into the driver's seat. He sped away, not daring to look back. In his rearview mirror, he saw the first flames lick the side of Sarah's barn. Then, the old farmhouse itself began to glow from within, before being swallowed by the inferno. He had made it out with only minutes to spare. He drove to the evacuation center set up at the town's high school gym. Paramedics immediately tended to Sarah, who was conscious but weak from smoke inhalation. As Jack stood there, covered in soot and sweat, catching his breath, people started to realize what he had done. He wasn't looking for praise. He was just relieved they were safe. In the days that followed, the fire was eventually contained, but not before it left a landscape of blackened earth and smoldering ruins. Sarah's farm was gone. Parts of Jack's own ranch were damaged, but his home and main barns were saved, thanks to the tireless work of the firefighters. But from those ashes, something incredible grew. The community, inspired by Jack's selfless act, rallied together. Volunteers showed up to help him repair his fences. A fundraiser was started for Sarah, and people donated clothes, furniture, and money to help her rebuild. Jack's courage had ignited a different kind of fire, a fire of hope, generosity, and community spirit. Jack never called himself a hero. To this day, if you ask him about it, he'll just shrug and say, "You do what you have to do for your neighbors." But his actions that night prove that heroes aren't just people in capes. They're ordinary people, like a quiet rancher, who, when faced with the fire, choose to run towards it, not for glory, but for the simple, powerful reason that it's the right thing to do. Thank you so much for watching. Stories like Jack's remind us of the strength and goodness within our communities. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring content, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.